Hello, BookTube. This is part three of a semi-ongoing series to do with science fiction. It's not in any way comprehensive. It's just you could almost call it a bit of a shelf tour, but these books haven't really been on a shelf for quite some time. I did my the SF Masterworks that I have. It was sort of a general about the series, but mostly just showing the ones I have. And then I did the same thing for the British Library Science Fiction Classics. I have most of that set so far, but it's going to be an ongoing set. I was going to show my somewhere here. There it is. My Asimov sort of small collection, these Harper paperbacks, but this one is sort of accessible. I just have to get it out of the pile here, but the others are still inaccessible a bit. And moving other stuff around, I found most of, there's about three or four that I still not sure where they are at the moment, of sort of science fiction reference books that I have. It's a very tiny collection compared to what I used to have in Canada, but I've slowly, since I've been in the UK here, picking up when I can some of the books that I had, and there's a couple of them that are really great. I think they're the best sort of history of science fiction that you can get. And there's been new ones. I've read a few of the newer ones. Nothing within the last, say, 15, 20 years. I've kind of looked occasionally to see what's been published, but most of them are very, very tiny studies, or they're academic studies, which are interesting, but not so much sort of the history of science fiction in that way. And so we'll go through. I have a few piles here to go through. This here, I've shown this before. This is my favorite book about science fiction, the history of science fiction. It's by Corey and Alexei Panshin. It's The World Beyond the Hill, Science Fiction and the Quest for Transcendence. It was first published by Jeremy P. Tarcher. It was really done as a limited signed edition. This is a first. Elephant Books, I think, was the publisher of the limited edition. This was done in 1989, and I originally got it out of the library probably about 1990. My local library in Canada had it and read it, and then immediately went and purchased a copy, and then I reread that again, probably about 2000, I think it was, about a decade later. And then I got it here in the UK. This one's a bit rough copy, but it's hard to get in hardcover. The original edition in really good condition, at least price wise. So it took a while. It's just fabulous. It doesn't bring up fully to the present. It sort of goes up to like, post golden age, and then it sort of ends there. They've never really done a second volume, which really would have been nice to keep it up to sort of more or less present. But this is just fabulous. It's very substantial. It's like 600 and some pages. It's my favorite. It's well written, and I think there's paperback reprints that might still be in print. But definitely this is worth reading. The next one that I had read was Brian Aldiss's Billion Year Spree. It's a history of science fiction. This was the edition that I had originally read, and I found this here for, I think, 50p in a charity shop or somewhere. Didn't pay much for it. I think it was 50p. It looks like it was 75p according to the back. I kind of like these Corgi SF Collectors Library. I used to have several of them. I had, what's the H.G. Wells, Shape of Things to Come. Yeah, there it is. It's on the bottom there. It's Corgi, division of Transworld Publishers Limited. And this was originally published by Weidenfeld in 1970, Weidenfeld Nicholson, 1973. And this is 1975 Corgi edition. And it sort of goes up pretty contemporary with the writing of it. And I also, since I've been here, I picked up a copy of the hardcover of it. It's in pretty rough shape, the jacket, but it was really cheap. It's got, foxing on the page edge, and this is the original Weidenfeld and Nicholson 1973 first edition. But later, he and someone else, what's the guy's name? Let's look here. I always forget it. David Wingrove updated it and called it the Trillion Year Spree. And this is the hardcover copy of that. And it came out in 1986, and they do sort of bring it up to date. Most of it, I think, was done by David Wingrove, but this is a kind of a nice addition. It's got some foxing on it, but there's a little sticker in here saying this book was a personal copy of the author Brian W. Aldiss, part of his effects at his home at the time of his death in August 2017, and this is signed by Wendy Aldiss, literary executor, Brian Aldiss estate. So that's a little sticker that's in. So that's kind of nice. It's not signed by him or anything like that. It's a little rough, so I don't know where he kept it. It must not have been in his house because there's foxing on it, or there definitely wasn't good heating. But it's really good. Those two are, to me, the best single sort of volumes of the history of science fiction. Then another great one. There's an online version now, so it hasn't done any other update. This is a honker. It's John Clute and Peter Nichols, the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. This is the 6th edition, I think. And I think it was the last edition done in hardcover. Consulting editor was Brian Stableford, and John Grant was technical editor. Can't remember what edition this actually is, but it's fabulous. This is a bit rough, but it's literally an encyclopedia of science fiction. There's a companion volume that's fantasy as well, which is good. I'm not a big fan. I'm not really a fantasy reader, but I had these in Canada, and it was nice to have a reference for fantasy for various reasons. But this is really good. It's got entries of most authors, and it talks about the pseudonyms they used and everything. So this is really good. But I believe there's an updated, there's an online version. I think it's free, that you can. That's obviously always updated, corrected, and so forth. It's really good as well. So I've used that at times to check a few things. Here's one. This is the next library. This is the first edition of it. I picked this up for next to nothing. It's a bit rough. I think there's 4th edition. I think it's the newest. I don't know if it's done again anymore in hardcover, but there's a 4th edition. It's called Anatomy of Wonder. It's science fiction. It's a bibliographic guides to contemporary collectors series, and it's by Neil Barron, R. Boker and Company in 1976. And what it does is it goes through like the literature of science fiction from beginnings to 1870. And it has a little essay at the beginning, well, very brief introduction, but they go through titles and describe them in its place in science fiction. And some of them are, as you can see, are short entries, and some are a bit longer. Each edition is interesting in itself. This one has more older stuff in it, the first one and the second one as well. Actually, I've never actually had. I owned the second edition. I've only seen it in the library. I did buy the 3rd edition when it came out. I bought it brand new. I had in Canada, and then there is a 4th. I don't think there's a 5th. I don't think it's done, but it's a fabulous resource for older science fiction, and the annotations in it are pretty spot on for most of the stuff, I would say. And here's, like I say, some of these are just sort of, I've been sort of, when I see them, I get them to sort of add to recreating a bit of a science fiction reference library. This is a fabulous. There's a few volumes of this. It's called Hell's Cartographers. It's just absolutely fabulous. It's edited by Brian W. Aldiss again, who did the Billion Year Spree and Trillion Year Spree, and Harry Harrison, science fiction writer. And it's basically Hell's Cartographers, some personal histories of science fiction writers, and they're writing about themselves. And in this volume, we've got Alfred Bester, Damon Knight, Frederick Pohl, Robert Silverberg, Harry Harrison, Brian W. Aldiss, and it's SF Horizons of a production of Weidenfeld and Nicholson, 1975. And I was really happy to get this. I only had a paperback of this in Canada, so when I saw this really cheap, I snapped it up. No, I don't have a price in it, so I can't remember how much that was. But there is at least a second volume of this. There might be a third one. I'm not sure. And here's a more recent one that is excellent. I have still yet to finish reading it, but so far what I've read is excellent. It's called Astounding by Alec Novella Lee. This has been around on BookTube for a bit, and it's basically the Astounding magazine about John W. Campbell, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, L. Ron Hubbard, and the golden age of science fiction. It's actually really good. It does talk about the controversies, the bad things as well as the good things. And this was published in 2018 by Day Street, an imprint of William Morrow. And it's fabulous. It's got it just goes through the golden age science fiction. It's really good. This is, to me, along with the Brian Aldiss stuff, this is getting a little narrower time period, but this is also just for the history of. That's an excellent one for a new one. As I say, there's a lot of new ones there's been a proliferation in the last 25, 30 years of books about science fiction. Some are good, some aren't so good. Some of them are just too general, for me anyway. But I'm always on the lookout for them. Here's a fabulous one, even though it's a writer that I'm a bit ambivalent about. I do like his short fiction rather than his novels. But this is a fabulous collection. It's Grumbles from the Grave. It's edited by Virginia Heinlein. These are letters to and from. I think there might be letters to him as well, and then they show the forget now. But anyway, it's mostly his letters to various people, other authors, publishers, television people, you name it. And it was published by Del Rey Ballantine Books, and it was done in 1990. It's a fabulous collection of letters. I do have I think it's called I Asimov. It's a collection of some of his letters. That's really good as well. And the other one that I have sort of right off the hand here, this is a book club edition. I was told it was a perfect condition, first edition. It's not. I will get it again in a proper edition. I had it in Canada. It's fabulous. The Road to Dune. It's Frank Herbert's material in it, as well as supplemented by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, who have continued on with the stories from the Dune, whether you like them or not. This is just poorly made. It's the pages are already yellowing on it, and it's got some horrible, inscription and marker on it. But the text is there, and I've perused it a little bit since I got it, but I definitely want to get that again. I also have, which I couldn't locate at the moment, is the biography of Frank Herbert that Brian Herbert's done. That's pretty good. But yeah, that's I do have a few other things. I do have. Oh, there is another one here if I can reach it here. I have not read this yet. I picked it up on Amazon a couple of years ago when it was like only £1 something. It's called Robot Ghosts and Wired Dreams, Japanese Science Fiction from Origins to Anime. Christopher Bolton, Istvan Serksi Rani Jr. and Takuri Tatsumi are editors. It's a collection of essays on sort of the origins of Japanese science fiction. It was published in 2007. This is a paperback, obviously, of must have come out in hardcover. Maybe not. Oh yeah, it did. Yeah, it did come out in hardcover. I've not read this, but for I think it was under £2. So it's a bit rough. But I thought because I know nothing regarding Japanese science fiction other than some of the later stuff that I'm not interested in, but the origins I'm interested. So I will get to that at some point. I've got a couple other ones, as I say, but I don't know where they are. The aforementioned Asimov and the aforementioned Herbert biography, but there are lots of them out there. I'm my personal biggest interest is golden age science fiction and before. Uh, and that includes like the fantastic fiction of the 19th century H.G. Wells and stuff like that. But yeah, so like I say, this is in no way a comprehensive list of books. It's just a little tour of what I've got, but it's this book that if you want anything on sort of science fiction, this is just absolutely fabulous. Well written. It reads like a novel pretty well, and they're really good writers. I like this. I like their nonfiction better than their fiction, that's for sure. But they only did they collaborated, I think, on husband and wife on one novel, and they're pseudonymous writings by Alexei Panshin. Yeah, they're okay. Obviously or not obviously, but I like their short stories better. And then this here, or the new Trillion Year Spree, is fabulous as well. So yeah, so as I say, anybody else has any favorites, please sound out in the comments. There's many that Steve Donahue has shown a few times. He's received 2 copies of this already. Is the Galaxy, a collection of sort of reminiscences of Galaxy magazine, and there's a volume 2 that those are very good as well, but specifically to the authors that were chosen to, or that made contributions, but also specific to Galaxy, and that's an important, very important magazine in the history of American science fiction. Is definitely a Galaxy, and when H.L. Gold started it, it sort of broke the golden age, the John W. Campbell era of science fiction, and ushered in a new era, for better or for worse. But yeah, and I used to have a lot of like collections of science fiction, and the really good ones had like little introductions, usually talking about the collected stories that are in there, and like sometimes little essays on science fiction if it's a science fiction of a year, and sort of the editor's assessment of that science fiction, and all that stuff is absolutely fabulous. And it's the kind of thing where sometimes those introductions and those little essays far outweigh the stories that are actually in the book, in my opinion. But yeah, those are all gone. And also too, I have another, yes, sorry, I forgot. I did know where it was, but it's Isaac Asimov's little book on science fiction. It's his writings, his essays that were mostly, I think, in Magazine of Science Fiction and or Asimov science fiction, but it's a nice little collection of essays on his take on science fiction. So that's another one. So yeah, there's about 5 that I haven't shown that I personally have here. But yeah, no, if anybody has any titles, and especially some new ones, if you know of any new ones that are really good for the history of science fiction, I'd love to hear of those. But anyway, take care, BookTube, and next week, hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be able to do my Asimov as promised. Take care.